O Lord, are the Prince of Peace. May you dwell in our hearts and fill us with your loving presence, that in planting the seeds of tranquility, so that united in love, our nation will finally see the of living in serenity and contentment. With gratitude and joyful surrender in our hearts, trust our future to you, Lord. And this we ask in your mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Roll. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S, Cayetano Sor Santiago, Ejercito, Enriles, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marco, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillan, Senate President Rilon.
Third, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense the Journal of Session, June 9, and consider the...
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The reading of the Journal of Session number 84, Tuesday 15, is hereby dispensed.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
The Secretary will read the reference of business.
From the House of Representatives, capacity of the Northern Mindanao Medical Center in Cagayan de Oro City, amending for the purpose, Republic Act number 7938, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, and Senate number 2655 as an amendment to House number 67, entitled an act converting the Davao Regional Hospital into Davao Regional Center, increasing its bed capacity, and appropriating funds therefore amending for the purpose, Republic Act number 5702 as amended.
To the archives.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 3 June 2015, it concurred with the amendments introduced by the Senate on House number 4073, entitled an act granting Philippine citizenship to Farrell Eldrian Wu.
To the archives.
39, an act free college education in information and communications technology.
Arts and Culture, Finance.
Resolutions. Senate Concurrent Resolution number 7, entitled Concurrent Resolution providing for the adjournment of the second regular session, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
And Rules.
Yes, Resolution number 1398, entitled Resolution, read and approved the Journal of the 85th by Senator Pimentel III.
Rules.
Yes, Resolution 99, authorizing the production and distribution of 150 digital copies each of the Journal and the Record of the Senate for the second regular session of the 16th Congress of the Philippines by Senator Pimentel III.
Committee on Rules.
Committee report number 181, submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service and Finance and Senate.
For ordinary business.
Additional reference of business. Bills on first reading. Senate number 2840, an act providing for a revised human organ and tissue donation and transplantation program and providing penalties for violation thereof, repealing for the purpose, and tissue transplantation program and providing penalties for violation thereof, purpose, Republic.
Finance.
Senate number 2841, an act strengthening the mechanisms for the protection and conservation of the national culture, broadening the mandate of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, enhancing its powers and functions, rationalizing duties of affiliated cultural agencies, providing penalties for violations of funds, Republic Act 66, otherwise known as the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009, and Republic Act number 7356, otherwise known as the law of P.
Education, Arts and Culture, Ways and Means, Finance.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 1400, that on the implementation of the Organic Agricultural Program in relation to Declaration as the International Year of Soils by Senator Cynthia Villar.
Agriculture and Food.
PS Resolution, Senator Cynthia Villar.
Agriculture and Food.
1. Directing the Senate Committee on Government Corporations to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation to look into the mandate, powers, and own and created under Presidential Decree number 14 to its charter if necessary, to ensure that its powers and functions are relevant and could address its mandated objectives as well as the various concerns. Cynthia A. Villar.
And Games, Amusement and Sports, Government Corporations and Enterprises.
Communications letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issue in compliance with Section 15A of RA number 7653, the New Central Bank number M 2015-23, dated 19 May 2015, and circular numbers 87779 and 22 May.
First of all, we would like to acknowledge former Senator Leticia Ramos-Shahani, Board Member Ranjit Ramos-Shahani, Mr. Chanda Narciso Ramos-Shahani, and ASEC Shahani and Company.
We welcome our former colleague, Senator Leticia. Welcome to the Senate, our dear Letty. We also welcome her children, Board Member Ranjit Shahani, Assistant Secretary Laila Shahani, and Mr. Chanda R. Shahani.
Mr. President, we would also like to acknowledge political science students from the University of Caloocan City.
The students of the University and City is hereby acknowledged.
Mr. President, we would also like to acknowledge your Engineer Catalino Davis, Dr. Esperanza Kayanan, Dr. Cynthia Celebre, Ms. Sylvia Davis, Engineer Peralta, Dr. Bonifacio Pajuelias, Ms. Telma Cinco, Mr. Jose Suarez, ASEC Raymond Liboro, ASEC Oswaldo, and other department liaison officials, Mr. President.
We acknowledge the presence
Group, and I failed to mention this, Mr. Ramon Agustin, Dr. Esperanza Kayanan, and former Congressman Angelo Palmones are also with us. Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 1396.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of proposed Senate resolution order.
May we request the Secretary to read the title and text of the measure?
Secretary will read the title and text of the measure.
Secretary to read the title and text of the measure.
Secretary, title and text of the measure.
Legarda. Resolution honoring former Senate President Pro Tempore Leticia Ramos-Shahani. Legarda. Resolution honoring Senate President Pro Tempore Shahani, who continues to serve the nation and the Filipino people with utmost dedication and excellence, recognizing her. Whereas, as a distinguished member, advocate, and civil society leader. Whereas, as a distinguished member of the Philippine Senate from 1987 to 1990, she positionally improved women in Nairobi, Kenya in 1985, and was head of the Philippine delegation to the UN France as secretary of the UN Third World Conference on Women in Nairobi, Kenya in 1985, and was head of the Philippine delegation in 1995. Whereas continuing this advocacy in the Senate, 67 strengthening the prohibition of the anti-rape law of 1997, which redefined the anti-rape law of 1996 and RA 8 is chairperson of the Filipino women in 1975 to 1980. Whereas her distinguished academic record includes a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, 1952, and doctorate at the University in Paris, 1962, as a French government scholar, with her doctoral thesis meriting the highest honors. She has college at the Philippines Graduate School. Whereas up to this day, and development studies in Miriam, passionately advocate the first of the Speaker of Chevalier, Colorado, USA, October 1992, 9, Mother of the Year Award, National 52, 8, and that make Denver, Colorado, USA, October 1992, 9, Mother of the National Federation of Women's Clubs, Philippines, December 9, Gold, Vladimiresco, in Nation Service Towns, Manila, 1970. Pangasinan was born to a family of public servants, beginning from her parents, Narciso Ramos, who served as Foreign Affairs Secretary and considers one of the founding fathers of the Association of Southeast Asian, and Angela Marcos Valdez, a public school teacher, and most notably her brother, the 12th President of the Philippines, Fidel Valdez Ramos. Whereas it is incumbent upon the Senate to recognize one of the finest and most legislators to have ever graced its halls and acknowledge her untiring efforts in pushing for valuable legislation on paramount national interest. Now, therefore, resolved as it is hereby resolved by the Senate of the Philippines to honor former Senate President pro tempore Leticia Ramos Shahani, continues to serve the nation and the Filipino people with utmost dedication and excellence, recognizing her outstanding contributions as legislator, diplomat, and civil.
President, I move that we approve Senate Resolution number 6, subject to style.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Proposed Senate Resolution number 1396 is hereby adopted, subject.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend the session to allow the senators to congratulate the awardee and for a photo opportunity.
The chair hears none. Proposed Senate Resolution number
Mr. President, I move that we suspend the session to allow the senators to congratulate the awardee and for a photo.
The second generation, naabutan ko pa ama nyo, ngayon mga anak ko na. Ay, young naman. O si Nene. Junior. Nene. Imagine, puro anak na nga pala. Ginggona, Pimentel. Marcos is accepted.
Matter of public.
Senator Hercito is recognized on a matter of public interest.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. The Senate Committee on Public Services that tackled the situation of the Philippine nationals, our long-established and railway system have been confirmed. This conviction confirmed. This to study and learn Hong Kong mula sa CCTV. Ang nalalabas ng Administrasyong Aquino, subalit na nanatiling mataas ang poverty rate sa ating bansa. Only through and full rehabilitation of our railway system of an efficient trains. Our trains are old and dilapidated. Habang napaka-40 billion pesos ang hinihingi ng PNR para sa pagsasalitasyon ng tren at mga pasilidad nito, ang ating pong lumaan at kumukupo ng mga kababayan. Tansya ng gobyerno ng isang komprehensibong plano ng tren sa buong bansa. Bakit wala remain stagnant kung sa industriya pa lamang ng mga tren at pampublikong transportasyon, malamang manggagawa at profesional. Sa pamamagitan ay pwede na at umuwi sa Pampanga o Tarlac sa hapon. Dahil dito mapapababa na of living sa ating po dito sa Metro Manila. Di gumagalaw at nagalit ang mga negosyante dahil naipit ang kanilang mga produkto sa mga 6, Mr. President, and other key cities will be finally reduced. Dahil tiyak na tatangkilikin ng mga pasahero ang mabilis at komportableng integrated railway system, inaasahan din natin na bababa na ang bilang ng mga pribadong sasakyan sa lansangan dahil sa mas pipiliin ng mga motorista ang kawalan ng traffic sa mga riles at makakarating pa sila ng mas mabilis sa kanilang patutunguhan. Ang paggamit ng tren para sa kalakal tulad ng nakagawian dati sa Tutuban, magsisilbing transportahan at pinagtatabuhan ng ating mga kababayan. Alat, 6 lang ibang problema, kundi ang pagsasaayos at pagpapaunlad ng mass rail sa ating bansa. Makapos ang pagbili at pagmamayari na mas lalong pagsisikip ng mga lansangan. Sa katunayan sa makinakarap at pagpapaunlad ng mass railway transportation sa ating bansa. Ng halos na nag-invest. If we are able to borrow for CCT, which has no return, all the more lansangan. Sa katunayan, nakapagbenta ang Pilipinas ng 30 on na mayroon tayong 260 piso na underspending, Mr. President. Hindi pwedeng at pagsasagawa na lamang na reforma ang pagyayabang natin. Yan ay may performance din. Ang halaga ng paid dividends. kamakailan na balita na mayroon tayong 266. In closing, Mr. President, dear colleagues, it is about time that we address our weakness in public infrastructure. One of the reasons why our economy has not fully towards the President, dear colleagues, it is about time that we address our weakness in public infrastructure. One of the reasons the economy fully taken off in spite of by taking a huge step towards the servants of people can provide this by taking a step towards progress. And
Any objection? Hearing none, so referred.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer number 2834 under committee report number 176, ordinary business, to the calendar for.
So transferred.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2834, the measure.
Do so.
Atmospheric, geophysical,
For the measure.
Senator Recto is recognized for the measure.
We recognize Senate to sponsor the measure.
Senator Recto is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Place that is submerged in lie on the Pag-asa to give us the head so we can have a head start. Not just a foul weather friend, early bulletins during typhoon. And both fishermen plot their flights on when the sun will rise. And both fishermen leaving taipans consult the lunar calendar for good fortune. Tells us when it would rain and by how much, so that the man behind the Carabao, it is becoming an increasingly needed app for a country which has to cope with an increasingly changing climate. We don't need historical weather data to tell us that storms are getting frequent and ferocious. Each of us has been a victim of at least one in the past 9 years. So we don't just read about typhoons, we reel from them. There was an army of millennium Senyang in 2006. Frank laid waste to Panay in 2008, but thankfully there was another Frank who helped it back on its feet. Ondoy marinated large swaths of Manila the following year, and it was only in 2009 that Pepeng transferred that flat land from Bulacan to Pangasinan of Luzon. In the most unexpected place and time, Hackney December in Mindanao, injured, and 4,169 missing. It affected almost 100 million persons, damaged 4.5 million houses, and destroyed 338 billion worth of public and private funds. Damaged 4.5 million houses and destroyed 338 billion worth of public is as harmful. The other end to know that a dam without water is just as frightening than one that is about to overflow. End of the climatic pendulum swing are droughts, and we have come to know that are just as frightening than one that is about to overflow. Mere dry area marked by weather extremes is that our crops are vulnerable to death by drought or by drowning. But Typhoon Archipelago, most number of disasters since the 1900s, and are being a doormat to typhoons, which cramps more people per square kilometer than China, two of which disasters since the 1900s, and are being a doormat to typhoons, which cramps more people per square kilometer. By will sit in the 44th Congress of the Philippines, senators who will sit in the 44th Congress of the Philippines, like Cheese Escudero. This is based that every 1 degree Celsius increase in review. Seal will plot the calculus that every 1 degree Celsius increase for longer periods. Against this backdrop, I'll pass a best practices for longer periods. Against this backdrop, apply with the global trend, modernization. Cutting emissions might be a tall order, but by passing this bill, government can no longer, because there can be no adaptation without Weather Bureau modernization. Cutting emissions might be a tall order, but by passing this bill, government doing hot air. Climate change or not, a modern and efficient which there is no substitute. When you march down the aisle, you look up for blessings and to the sky to see if rains will mar your wedding. When you plan a family picnic, you want to be assured that the date chosen, a agency that wants local weather, especially in Metro Manila, where the economic cost, especially in Metro Manila, where the economic of vehicular traffic is already 2.4 billion on rapidly turn into a water world. At present, among Pag-asa's mandate is to provide up-to-date, timely action and integrated water resources management. Another mandate is to ensure that the country's international commitments are met, because if typhoons respect no boundaries, so must meteorological work span costing a little less than 3.9 billion in infrastructure with 4 typhoons. Joy, Pep, 2009, Yolanda in 2013, and Glenda just last year. Development and culture typhoons on Pepeng in 2000, Yolanda 2013 cost. Second is research and development enhancement and international. For example, local non-government weather outfits, if tapped, are effective force extenders. Keeping this network, using their data, will cut both local stakeholders. Building up its human resources. It has been reported that more and more Pag-asa personnel leave the Philippines for the rewarding while we train and develop more of them. This bill is creation of a pay scale for Pag-asa employees. In meteorology, also be offered. Ideally, bureaucracy-wide. More programs in all, the total cost to modernize Pag-asa is capital outlay of 3.9 billion. 45 capital outlay of 3.9 billion. 45 as well as future needs taps both budgetary and the latter is to be seen. If we need to get it from giving revenue, so be it. We need the money so we don't have to roll the dice or read the cards in predicting if it will rain tomorrow. Another revenue source we are eyeing is income from Pag-asa's specialized products and services, as well as their data. For example, pay for these, price, safety, and such other material for the products, because the nation's ODA, budgetary surpluses, and income from the Modernization Trust Fund. The modernized Pag-asa will be led by an administrative bank of understanding, of which will be annual cost of modernization shall be in the General Appropriations Act. Whatever the amount will dwarf the damages of typhoons, climate change era when they're coming in from unexpected places. Mr. President, my dear colleague, Pag-asa's future. Let me take you back to its past. Pag-asa traces its beginnings to January 1865, when 2 Jesuits started weather in the Jesuits started 150th founding anniversary. But we must approve this bill not because we want it to be a birthday gift to this agency. We must pass it because this is what our people, our country, and their future need. As the dark clouds of climate change hover, and their future need. As the dark clouds of hover, if Pag-asa is given one. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, let us immediately pass this bill. Immediately pass this bill.
Number 28, report number 1. Mr. President, I move that we transfer House Bill number 1841 under Committee Report 1 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
So transferred.
With the consent of
Just recognize.
Majority Leader, thank you, Mr. President. Esteemed colleagues, I rise today to sponsor Committee Report number 111, which seeks to change the name of Batasan Hills National High School City to Corazon C. Aquino National High School. The school was by Act number 7987 and founded in 1890 Aquino National High School. Act number 7 secondary schools in Quezon City. I'm one of the largest of President Corazon Hills in the school. After the hearing, we received written declarations of support from the faculty, barangay, and a people's consultant. After the hearing, we received written declarations of support from the faculty, barangay, and a people's consultant school's proposal. People's consultant has issued.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend the following of House Bill 21 on terms of Senate Bill. Is the probation law, Mr. President. For the majority, Senator Coco Pimentel and Senator Sani Angara, and for the minority, Senator. President, we are in receipt of the Conference Committee report.
Consideration of the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing provision on the Fair Competition Act to submit the report to the chamber.
Of Senate Bill number 2282, entitled An Act Promoting Fair Competition, Consumer Welfare, Advanced Domestic and International Trade, and Sustained Economic Development by, among others, regulating monopolies, anti-competitive agreements, abuse of dominant position, and anti-competitive mergers, establishing the Fair Competition Commission, and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, and House Bill number 5286, entitled An Act Promoting means prohibiting agreements, abusing funds therefore, as my sponsorship speech, and consider this read in toto into the records, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move that we adopt the Conference Committee reports, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move that we adopt the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions.
Is there any bicameral report on Senate Bill number 2?
It shall now be no Competition Act, Mr. President.
The Philippine Competition Act. Any objection?
Move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders the following and Senate Bill. Mr. President, I move that we consider on second reading under one omnibus sponsorship Senate Bill number 129 and 2836 as reported out on active committee reports.
Without any objection, the motion is adopted.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the titles of the bills without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text.
Before the Secretary, suspension on the matter to these bills.
Raise.
Tama, surface man.
Ano po yung in-approve pong motion?
ng mining workers.
Ano ba yung in-approve kong motion?
If you want to separate
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I withdraw the earlier motion. And instead, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Senate Bill number 129, under Committee Report number 70.
In order.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate,
Protection of the laws.
I move that we consider Senate Bill number 129 under Committee Report number 70.
In order.
And with the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act amending Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines, by adding a new Article 287-A, reducing the retirement age of racehorse jockeys from 60 to 55.
I move that we recognize Senator Angara to sponsor the measure, Mr. President.
Senator Angara is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, distinguished colleagues. Bilang acting chairman po ng Senate Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development, malaking karangalan para i-sponsor po itong mga panukala ngayon. Ginoong Presidente, marahil nasa isipan po natin lahat ang malungkot na naganap kamakailan lang sa pabrika ng Kentex. At habang patuloy pong iniimbestigahan ito ng mga otoridad, sana'y muling naididiin sa ating isipan ang kahalagahan ng occupational health and safety sa ating trabaho. Ang trabaho po kasi ay paghahanap buhay, hindi paghahanabaan ng kanilang pagretiro. Ito po ang pangitain na pumapalikod sa ating polisiya hinggil sa mga pensyon at retirement benefits. Ipinapatupad na taliwas sa layunin na ito. Punan at isata mga pagkukulang ng ganito tulad po ng surface miners at racehorse jockeys o hinete na may edad na. Itong bill po ay pinag-uusapan po ang mga racehorse nilang mga katawan pisikal. Bugbog na bugbog ang para patakbuhin ang mga ang hinihinging bilis para manaig alisto sa buong panahon ng kanilang paghahanap buhay sa kahabaan ng kanilang karera sa pagkarera. Kaya naangkop rin lamang na sa kanilang pagtanda, mabibigyan ang mga hinete ng sapat na suporta at proteksyon mula sa gobyerno. Itinalaga ng Philippine Racing Commission or PhilRacom ang mandatory retirement age ng mga hinete ng mga retiradong hinete na nasa edad 55 hanggang edad 60 ay hindi ng PhilRacom na sumali sa security system. Lalo na't malaking tulong ang naiambag ng Philippine horse racing industry sa kaunlaran ng Pilipinas. Sinasabing 1,000 jobs ang nakasalalay sa racehorse industry at papalaki at pag-aaruga sa mga majestikong kabayo. Tala ng Philippine Racing Commission or PhilRita ang gobyerno o government revenue na 14.5 billion pesos na may kaakibat na kita ang gobyerno o government revenue na 14. Tulong po ang mga karera sa kasaganaan at maayos pagpapatakbo ng ating lipunan. At syempre, mahalaga mabago na po ang mandatory retirement.
To some inquiries from the chair.
Hindi, yun yung jockeys, hinete. Hindi, yun yung Yes, Mr. President,
Yes,
most willing.
Any retirement age good sponsor inform the chair and spread into the record.
Underground mine workers. And there is a special, Mr. President, we have the underground mine. And there is a special which was passed in 1998, age for underground workers, Mr. President. I will furnish you if it comes to my knowledge that there are additional workers, Mr. President. And that's the reason if it comes to my knowledge that there are additional workers. The reason why the next bill we are sponsoring seeks to put surface mine workers on a par with the underground mine workers in
would have a different working conditions than almost everybody else compared to every other skill because they go underground. And therefore, by international convention, which we have agreed to, which we have ratified and adopted, between surface and undermine workers, that lower retirement age. But in other words, the chair would like to know what is the substantive distinction between an ordinary worker and a surface or a professional racehorse jockey.
difference between a
What are the between an ordinary
mine worker and a race jockey?
no, an ordinary surface mine and an ordinary worker. I mean,
What's the difference between a
for that matter, relation. What is the distinction? What is the substantial between a professional racehorse and employee in a manufacturing firm?
I think it's the physical conditions which are physical the similarity the mine worker, whether ordinary mine or a lot of demands on their body, Mr. President. I suppose this is why the age to 55, because maybe from their experience saw that a lot of the physical facilities perhaps deteriorate. We had companies who came before who told us mine workers who had lingered for too long of the ailments which afflict these mine workers, Mr. President. And of course, I thank the presiding officer for his questions, being a former labor secretary and expert in this field.
Firstly, we support the lowering of a younger retirement or lower retirement age, in general. What we are just concerned is the constitutional provision on equal protection of the laws. Is there substantial distinction, differences between the profession into the record that this will not run afoul with the principle of equal protection of the laws?
I thank the Senate President for his questions. And again, we'll do our we'll break it down, Mr. President, and come back for under interpret that so we can.
Thank you.
Suspend consideration Senate Bill number 129 under committee report number.
Consideration of measure is suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer number 2836 under committee report number 1736 under committee special orders.
Mine workers from 60 to 50 years, amending for the purpose Article 293 of Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Angara to sponsor the measure.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Majority Leader, distinguished colleagues, once again, it is a measure similar to the previous measure under consideration, protecting employees. This is a bill sponsored in the House by Benguet Representative Ronald Cosar, comes from a mining community. Under existing law, sa kasalukuyan, ang mandatory retirement age, Mr. President, ng mga undergrad sa kasalukuyan, base po ito sa Republic Act 1998 na nag-amyenda ng Labor Code. Ito po'y itinalaga dahil may angking peligro ang propesyon ng pagmimina. Ito po'y itinalaga dahil may angking peligro ang mga katangian na wari unti-unting nawapas ng panahon. Ngunit hindi po naisama sa sakop ng RA 8558 ang miners, bagaman nahaharap din sila sa peligro tulad ng kanilang mga kasamahang nasa underground, so to speak, Mr. President. Ang retirement age ng mga surface miners, kasama po ang mill plant workers at mga mechanical, electrical, and tailings pond personnel ay nananatiling 60 years old. Salungat po ang polisiyeng ito sa International Labor Organization or Convention 176, mas kilala bilang Safety and Health in Mines Convention, na ipinagtibay at niratipika ng bansa noong 1998. ILO Convention 176 provides basic occupational rights for mine workers, while its Article 1 emphasizes that these rights cover not only underground workers, but personnel on the surface. Sa madaling salita, sa ilalim po ng konvensyon, ang proteksyon na inalaan para sa mga underground miners ay dapat sa mga surface miners. Malinaw na ang sitwasyon, lipunan natin nakakatanggap ng sapat na pag-aruga at suporta mula sa gobyerno. Hinahayaan natin maging exclusive imbis na inclusive ang takbo ng sapat na pag-aruga at suporta mula sa gobyerno. Hinahayaan natin maging exclusive imbis na inclusive ang takbo. Just like the horse racing industry, which has substantial contributions to our economy, Mr. President, ganoon din po sa mining industry na may gross production value noong 20 pesos ang contribution and other royal. Kaya po nananawagan tayo sa irebisita o inawagan tayo sa Labor Code.
President, suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2836, report number 170 under committee. Hear and receive Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 2226 and House Bill number 5 on the Student Athletes Protection Act. Now, copies of this report have been distributed to the Senate. So, Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, Angara, to present the bicameral conference report. Mr. President, 1 minute suspension, please.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Ready to session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Angara, the sponsor of the measure.
Senator Angara is recognized to submit the report to the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, distinguished colleagues. On behalf of the Chair of the Education Committee, Senator Pia Cayetano, I have the honor to submit a copy of the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions Senate Bill number
Move that the joint explanation of the Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill 225, which is on record, 226, and House Bill 51. We can see on the record it is the Vice Chairman who is sponsoring the submission of the joint explanation, but the Chair checked the signature. A majority of the bicameral conference contingent of the Senate did sign the conference committee report, and it is just being sponsored by the Vice Chair of the Senate contingent, Senator Sani Angara.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
I reiterate the motion, Mr. President.
All right. There is a motion. There is a motion that the considered as read into the record. Senator Angara has moved for its adoption. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader, on behalf of Senator Cayetano, the Chair of the Education Committee. Thank you.
Mr. Plenary, primary referral of proposed Senate Resolution 1 with the Committee on Games, Amusement, and Sports, while secondary referral was made to the Committee on Games, Amusement, and Sports, while secondary referral was made to the Committee on Government Corporations and Public and Secondary Referrals. So the primary referral of proposed Senate Resolution 1401 shall be the Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, and the secondary referral shall be the Committee on Games, Amusement, and Sports. I so move, Mr. President.
May the Chair inquire what is the subject of the resolution?
Mr. President, this is the resolution directing the Senate Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation to look into the mandate, powers, and responsibilities of the Philippine Racing Commission, PhilRacom, a government-owned and controlled corporation created under Charter, if necessary, to ensure that its powers and functions are relevant and could address its mandated objectives as necessary. Powers and are relevant and could address its mandated objectives as well as the various concerns and opportunities, while secondary referral is to Games, Amusement, and Sport, Mr. Chairman.
And both are within.
While secondary referral is to Games, Amusement, and Sport, Mr. Chairman.
And both are within, or the measure is within the jurisdiction, and therefore, any objection here and approved.
Of House Bill number 4484, under Committee Report number 1, the bill on Vigan Ilocos Sur Regional Trial Court, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that the sponsor delivered his speech yesterday, and I thus move that we open the period of interpellation.
Period for interpellation is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Pimentel.
Senator Pimentel is recognized.
And Mr. President,
Will the distinguished sponsor answer one or two questions, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, with pleasure.
Thank you. I distinctly remember you delivered a sponsorship speech on this particular measure in an omnibus manner, Mr. President. Am I right?
That's correct, Mr. President.
How many bills are there? Are these House bills?
16 House bills, Mr. President.
16. Of the 16, more or less, they are of the same content. They have the same content, I should say.
Yes, Mr. President. Bills create courts, but off-level courts, yung mga MTC. Some create level RTC.
All right. Well, I only remember you delivering that sponsorship speech. I wish you refresh on the content and why it is necessary to create these courts, Mr. President, if you don't mind.
I delivered my speech yesterday, Mr. President, so I will repeat the courts to be created, so we will know where, what areas will benefit from these bills?
No, Mr. President, the necessity of creating these courts, I would just like to confine it to that because I do understand.
Yes, sir. the current caseload of the existing courts in the area. For example, the bill we're talking about here is the current caseload is, we consider them as heavy enough to justify the creation of courts which will now absorb or take cognizance of the cases coming, so as to now give the existing courts some respite from additional cases.
When you say heavy, describing the load of the caseload, Mr. President, what would be a magic number, so to speak?
The formula, yes, Mr. President. In close coordination with the Office of the MTC level, 500 cases as your caseload, 500 should be manageable. So more than 500, right, you are now in the unmanageable territory. But 500 is also heavy. And then in the second level courts, the RTC, 300 is the figure that we have in mind. 300 cases.
Number.
Because in the name of due process, a case which concerns 200,000 pesos in dispute will eat as much time as a case with 20 million pesos in dispute. As much time as a case with 20 million pesos in dispute, Mr. President.
Court being created, Mr. President?
No special drug courts, only the basic MTC, MET, and then RTCs.
Would you know the current policy that the Supreme Court is following concerning the creation or the assignment of special drug courts? I distinctly remember, during the time of the Supreme Court Chief Justice Renato Corona, after a meeting that I had conducted with him when I was Dangerous Drugs Board Chairman, he promised to create or to appoint special drug courts, even without our law yet. And I would...
You are correct, Mr. President. The current courts being considered as special drug courts are designated by the Supreme Court.
Yes, designated.
Hence, the more courts we create, then the more courts which can be designated as special drug courts.
All right, that will somehow...
we create, then the more courts which can be designated as courts.
All right, that will somehow lessen the load, of the other courts. So, okay, so 16 going to create now...
no, Mr. President, we're creating more. 16 bills.
16 bills, I'm sorry, yes.
Courts.
The 16 bills creating courts.
Total?
Yes.
Total. 56 courts. 56 courts.
56 incorporated into the, as far as the other bills are concerned, or the other bills that will be forthcoming. So in the meantime, I thank the distinguished gentleman and terminate my interpellation.
Thank you for the interpellation. And let me add, because of the questions which I was asked, although we have a formula, sometimes we anticipate, even though the caseload of the courts are not yet at the 500 or 300 level, but because of increased economic activity in the area, that the courts will soon exceed the said numbers. Then, by anticipating it, we also now create additional courts. President.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of interpellations. No other senator signified their intention to interpellate.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
Committee amendments is in order.
And that we recognize Senator Pimentel.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move...
Yes, Mr. President. We have a few committee amendments. Okay. Yes, Mr. President. amendments. Okay. On page 1, section 1, line 1, change the word and number 2 to the word branches to branch.
Any objection here?
On the same page in section line 2, delete the phrase "and in the municipality of Santo Domingo." And on line 3, change the word "are" to "is." On line 5, the word respective and delete the letter "s" after the word "numbers." And on line 5, change the word to "branch." I so move, Mr. President. Before the word "province." I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
Still on page 1, the second paragraph of line 1, in line 4, shall become section 2 of House Bill number 4484 and renumber the rest of the sections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
And change the word branches to branch. Line 5, delete the phrase "and in the municipality of Santo Domingo." And in the municipality of Santo Domingo, the word "annual." I so move annual. I so sentence at the end of the paragraph. Operation of the paragraph. Upon the actual organization of the court and its personnel, period. On page 2, section 3, line 8, insert the phrase "executive orders and" between the words "laws" and "rules." I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
On page 2, section 4, line 12, delete the phrase "in the official gazette or." I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
And amend the title to read as follows: "An act creating an additional branch of the Regional Trial Court to be stationed in the city of Vigan, situated in the province of Ilocos Sur, in the 1st Judicial Region, further amending for the purpose section 14, paragraph A of Batas Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended, and appropriating funds therefore." I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
That would be all for the committee amendments, Mr. President. So,
The period for committee amendments is terminated.
We approve on second.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 4484 under committee report number 150 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4484 under committee report number 150.
Consideration of measures 50 is hereby.
President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration under committee report number 151. Mr. President, I move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, no one signified their intention to interpellate, so I move that we close the period of interpellation.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments
Committee amendments is in order.
and that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Pimentel.
Senator Pimentel is
on page 1, section 1, lines 2 to 3, delete the phrase "are hereby the 6th Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Bacolod, province of Negros Occidental, to be stationed in the city of Bacolod, situated in the province of Negros Occidental, are hereby created in the 6th Judicial Region." I so move, Mr. President.
approved.
Still on page 1, the second paragraph of section 1, in line 4, shall become section 2 of House Bill number 4491, accordingly. And on line 5, delete the hyphen between the words "newly" and "created." I so move.
Approved.
On page 2, section 2, line 1, capitalize the first letter in the word "annual." I so move.
Approved.
Still on page 2, section 2, line 2, insert the following sentence at the end of the paragraph. The funds necessary for the operation of the courts herein created shall be appropriated and released only upon the actual organization of the courts and the appointment of its personnel.
Approved.
On page 2, section 3, line 4, insert the phrase "executive orders and" between the word "gazette" or. So move, Mr. President.
Approved.
And title to read as follows: "An act adding 3 additional branches of the trial court to be stationed in the city of Bacolod, situated in the province of Negros Occidental in the 6th Judicial Region, amending for the purpose Section 14, Paragraph G of Batas Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization of 1980, as amended, and appropriating funds therefore. I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
That would be all, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
Terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for individual amendments.
Approved.
And Mr. President, no one has signified their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
Approved.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none.
And for individual amendments.
Approved.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill 491
Under Committee Report Number 151.
Approved.
Mr. President of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill Number 4494 under Committee Report Number 152.
In order.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for interpellations.
Interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, no one signified their intention to interpolate, so I move that we open the period for committee amendments.
Any objection herein?
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Pimentel, the sponsor of the measure.
Senator Pimentel is recognized to sponsor the measure.
We propose the following committee amendments on page 1, section 1, lines 1 to 3. Delete the sentence, "There is hereby created a branch of the Regional Trial Court in the 3rd Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of San Jose del Monte, province of Bulacan." 2. Additional branch of the Regional Trial Court to be stationed in the city of San Jose del Monte, situated in the province of Bulacan, is hereby created in the 3rd Judicial Region. I so move,
Approved.
Mr. President. Still on page 1, the second paragraph of section 1, in line 4, shall become section 2 of House Bill number 4494 and renumber according.
Approved.
On page 1, section 2, line 10, insert the following sentence at the end of the paragraph. The funds necessary for the will be appropriated and released only upon the actual organization of the court and the appointment of its personnel. Period. I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
On page 2, section 3, line 2, insert the phrase on page 2, line 6, delete the phrase "in the official gazette" or. I so move.
Approved.
And to amend the title to read as follows: An act creating a branch of the Regional Trial Court to be stationed in the city of San Jose del Monte, situated in the province of Bulacan, in the 3rd Judicial Region, further amending for the purpose Section 14, Paragraph C of Batas Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980, as amended, and appropriating funds therefore. I so move.
Approved.
That would be all, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pimentel.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
So closed.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, no one has signified their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So closed.
I move, Mr. President, that we approve on second reading the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 4491 under committee report. Is it correct? Is it 4494? 4494 under committee report number 152 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number. We open the period.
In order.
Mr. President, no one signified their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period for interpolation.
So terminated.
I move that we open the period for.
Terminated.
I move that we open the period for amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
I move that we Senator Pimentel as sponsor of the measure.
Pimentel is recognized.
Ano tayo? House Bill? 2409. We are ready.
Yes.
We propose delete the sentence, "2 additional branches of the Municipal Trial Court of Angeles City, province of Pampanga, with seats there in cities to be stationed in Angeles City, situated in the province of Pampanga, are hereby created in the 3rd Judicial Region." I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
On page 1, section 3, line 10, insert the phrase in the 3rd Judicial Region after the word branches. I so move.
Approved.
On page 2, line 5, line implementation of this act and the sentence, the funding therefore shall likewise be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act, and change to operationalizations in the city of Angeles, trial court in Magalang, municipal trial court in cities in the city of all in the province of Pampanga. To 16, delete the phrase as well as other provisions that may be inconsistent herewith are deemed modified and or further amended to, and all other laws, executive orders, and rules and regulations which are inconsistent with this act are hereby amended, repealed, or modified accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Approved.
On page 2, section 7, line 18, delete the phrase in the official gazette or. I so move. And to amend the title to read as follows: an act creating 2 additional municipal trial courts in cities for Angeles City, 1 municipal trial court for Magalang, and 1 municipal trial court in cities for the city of Mabalacat, all situated in the province of Pampanga in the 3rd Judicial Region, thus amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended, and appropriating funds therefore. I so move, Mr. President. That would be all, sir.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
So terminated.
I move, Mr. President, that we open the period for individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments. In order.
Mr. President, no one signified their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the measure on second reading.
In objection, hearing none. House Bill number 2409 under Committee Report 156 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of the measure.
So suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 2701 under Committee Report number 157.
In order.
Mr. President, I move to open the period for interpellation.
Period for interpellation is in order.
As no one signified their intention to interpellate, Mr. President, I move that we close the period for interpellation.
So closed.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments.
Committee amendments in order.
I move that we recognize Senator Pimentel.
Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We propose the following committee amendments. On page 1, section 1, line 1, change 1 additional branch to an additional branch. On lines 1 to 2, delete the phrase for Sorsogon City with seat thereat, and change this to be stationed in the city of Sorsogon, situated in the province of Sorsogon. So move. On page 1, section 2, line 4, insert the phrase of the regional trial court in the 5th Judicial Region after the word branch. So move. On page 1, section 3, lines 7 to 8, delete the phrase implementation of this act and the sentence, the funding therefore shall likewise be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act, and change to operationalization of the additional branch of the Regional Trial Court in the city of Sorsogon, the funding of which shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move.
Approved.
On page 2, section 4, lines 2 to 4, change the phrase as well as other provisions that may be inconsistent herewith is hereby deemed repealed, modified, and or further amended to, and all other laws, executive orders, and rules and regulations which are inconsistent with this act are hereby amended, repealed, or modified accordingly. I so move.
Approved.
On page 2, section 5, line 6, delete the phrase in the official gazette or. I so move. And finally, to amend the title to read as follows: an act creating an additional branch of the Regional Trial Court to be stationed in Sorsogon City, situated in the province of Sorsogon, in the 5th Judicial Region, further amending for the purpose section 14, paragraph F of Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended and appropriating funds therefore. I so move.
Approved.
That would be all, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
Approved.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for individual amendments. Mr. President, no one has signified their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
Approved.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 2701? That's 2701 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 2701 under Committee Report 157.
Suspended. Can the chair ask for a 1-minute suspension?
your records in order.
Yeah.
To get your records in order.
We're not touching it. Tawagan ko si ano. Si Miro.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 2739 under Committee Report number 158.
In order.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of interpellations.
In order.
As no one, Mr. President, signified their intention to interpellate, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Approved.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of committee amendments,
So opened.
and I move that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, we have a few committee amendments, and I move that the proposed committee amendments enumerated in the committee report be deemed read and approved.
The committee amendments as
Their intention to provide individual amendments, so I move to close the individual amendments. So I move to close the. Mr. President, we approve on second reading the measure.
House Bill 2739 under Committee Report number 158. Upon motion of the Majority Leader is approved on second reading. Upon motion of the Majority Leader is
Mr. President, I move that we suspend the measure. Mr. President, no one signified their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period for interpolation.
so terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments,
Committee amendments is in order.
and I move that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Mr. President, I move that the proposed committee amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed read into the records and approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, the committee amendments as contained in the committee report, number 159 is hereby deemed read into the record, and the same is hereby approved upon motion of the sponsor.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
Opened.
Mr. President, no senator indicated their intention to provide individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading the measure.
House Bill number 3396 under Committee Report number
I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill 33, consideration of House Bill 33, of House Bill 3396. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4483 under Committee Report number 160.
in order. So opened.
Mr. President, no one indicated their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close. Mr. President, no one their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period. Mr. President, the period for committee amendments, and that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is recognized for the period of committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the proposed committee amendments contained in the committee report be deemed read into the record and approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, the amendments as indicated in Committee Report number 160 is hereby deemed read and hereby approved.
President, I move that we committee amendments. That we open the period for individual amendments.
So opened.
Mr. President, no senator indicated their individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So closed.
Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading the measure.
Any objection? House Bill number 4483 under Committee Report number 160 is hereby approved on second. Reading.
I move that we suspend consideration of this measure. 162.
In order.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for interpellations.
In order.
Mr. President, no one indicated their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of committee amendments and that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is recognized for the committee amendments.
Mr. President, I move that the proposed committee amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed read into the records and approved.
There is a motion that the committee amendments as indicated in Committee Report number 162 be deemed read into the record as amendments to House Bill number 159, and upon motion of the sponsor, the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we approve this measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none, House Bill number 159 under Committee Report 162 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 159 under
So
Committee Report
suspended.
number 162.
So suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 606 under Committee Report number 163.
In order.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period.
President, I move that the amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed read into the record and approved.
Any objection? None. The committee amendment as contained in on House Bill 606 is hereby deemed read into the record and is hereby deemed a portion of this.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
So terminated.
That we open the period for individual amendments.
So opened.
Mr. President, as no one, Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 6, the committee report number 1 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move that we suspend consideration of this measure.
So
I move that we resume consideration, Mr. President, of House Bill number 1771 under Committee Report.
any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for interpellations.
So opened.
No one signified, Mr. President, their intention to interpellate, so I move that we close the period for interpellations.
Period for interpellation terminated.
Mr. President, I move that
The committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Proposed committee amendments in the committee report be deemed read into the record and approved.
Hearing none, the committee amendments as contained in committee report number 164 is hereby deemed read into the record.
Mr. President, close the period for committee amendments.
Amendments terminated.
The period for amendments.
Individual amendments is in order.
No one signified their intention for individual amendments, Mr. President, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
Individual amendments terminated.
I move that we approve on second reading this measure, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill 1771 under Committee Report 164 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of this measure.
Suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 1772 under Committee Report number 165. Is
In order.
Mr. President, no intention to interpolate, so I move that we close interpellations.
Period for interpellation is
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments
committee
and that Senator
amendments.
Pimentel be recognized, Mr.
Senator
President.
Pimentel is committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the proposed committee amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed
Any objection?
read into the record and approved.
Any objection? The proposed committee amendment and
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
individual committee amendments terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments terminated. Open. It's open.
Mr. President, no one indicated their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period.
Period for individual amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we approve this measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 1772 under Committee Report number 164. The measure is suspended. Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 1772 under Committee Report number
Report number 166.
consideration of House Bill number 1980 is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, no one indicated their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments and that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is recognized to submit the committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the proposed committee amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed read into the record and approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The committee amendments as by approved.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
So closed.
Period for committee amendments.
So closed. 1 minute suspension.
I think I moved to amendments. President, no senator indicated their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So terminated.
Move that we approve House Bill 1980 under Committee Report number 166 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. under Committee Report number 166 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend this measure.
Consideration of the measure is suspended.
I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 2094 under Committee Report number 167.
Any objection?
Mr. President, no one indicated their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period of interpolations.
Interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of interpolations.
Interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments and that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is
Mr. President, I propose committee contained in the committee report.
any objection. Report number 167 is hereby deemed read into the record and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
Committee amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for individual amendments.
So terminated.
So open.
Opened, I'm sorry. Opened.
Mr. President, no one...
Committee amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for individual amendments.
So terminated.
So open.
Opened, I'm sorry. Opened.
Mr. President, no one indicated their intention, so I move that we individual amendments.
So terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 2094 under Committee Report 167 is approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we support number 1. I move that we open the interpolations.
Opened.
So I move that we close the period of interpolations.
So closed.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments and that Senator Pimentel be recognized.
Senator Pimentel is recognized for the period of committee amendments.
Thank you once again, Mr. President. Mr. President. I move that the proposed committee amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed read into the record and approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The committee amendments as contained in number 8 is hereby deemed read into the record and the same is approved.
Period of
Period so closed.
I move that we open the period of individual amendments.
So open.
Mr. President, no individual amendments.
So open.
Mr. President, no senator indicated their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So closed.
Mr. President, I move that we approve this measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 2186 under Committee Report number 168 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move that we suspend consideration of this measure, Mr. President.
So-
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 2260 under Committee Report number 169.
So, in order.
I move that we open the...
Interpolation is in order.
Mr. President, no senator indicated their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period of interpolation.
Period of interpolation is terminated.
Committee amendments and that Senator Pimentel be recognized, Mr.
Senator
President.
Pimentel is recognized for the period of committee amendments.
Mr. President, I move that the proposed committee amendments as contained in the committee report be deemed read into the record and approved.
The committee amendments as contained in Committee Report number 169 is read into the record and upon motion of the sponsor without any objection, the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period for committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the individual amendments, so I move that we close the period of individual amendments.
Individual amendments terminated.
I move that we approve on second reading this measure.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 2260 under Committee Report number 169 is the report number 169 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move, Mr. President, second additional...
The second additional reference of business is in order. The Secretary will read the second additional reference of business.
Message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 10 June 2015, it concurred with the amendments introduced by the Senate on House number 4400 entitled an act naming as the present the circumferential road which commences at the junction of the Iloilo Road in Balabago, Haro District, Iloilo City, then follows a general westward direction along the floodway south bank towards Buhang, Haro, Takas, Haro, and Ungka to Pavia, then traverses southwards to the Mandurriao District, Iloilo City, Pavia, San Miguel tri-border, and ends at the Iloilo Antique Road near the center of Arevalo District, Iloilo City.
To the archives.
Bill on first reading, Senate number 2842, amending certain sections of RA number 7309 entitled an act creating a Board of Claims under the Department of Justice for victims of unjust imprisonment or detention and victims of violent crimes, and for other purposes, Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr.
Justice and Human Rights, Social Justice, Welfare,
In aid of legislation regarding internet neutrality and if this is being practiced by internet service providers in the Philippines, Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr.
Public Services,
Committee reports, Committee 2, submitted by the Committee on Finance on PS Resolution number 988, introduced by Senator Defensor Santiago, entitled Resolution directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in legislation, the acceleration program funds of for government-owned and controlled corporations. Resolution number 896, introduced by Senator Defensor Santiago, entitled Resolution directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in legislation that 660 million disbursement program funds that were given to the Philippine Institute for Development Studies meant to boost the economy remain unspent or unaccounted for, recommending that this be archived. The economy remain unspent or unaccounted for, recommending that number 183 prepared and submitted jointly by the committee entitled an act providing for affordable drug rehabilitation treatment for Philippine Health Insurance Corporation PHIC beneficiaries, further amending Republic Act 7875 as amended, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate number 3, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
Ordinary Business. Majority Leader.
I ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute. Pagtabi ko sa mga basura.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move consideration of Senate Bill 2712, Part number 117.
Consideration of the measure is in order. In order.
Mr. President, I move.
More interpellations, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
There are no more interpellations, Mr. President.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments and that we
The period for committee amendments is in order. Senator Ligarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no committee amendments, Mr. President. But there are no committee amendments.
Ligarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
What?
Committee amendments, but there are individual amendments which I will read in the substitute bill of Senators Osmeña and Villar.
Mr. President, that being the case, I move that we close the period for committee amendment.
Okay. Period for committee amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, I move the period for individual amendments and we recognize Senators.
Suspension. Can we have a 1 minute suspension? Please proceed with the individual amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the Declaration of Policy, number 1 on page 1, between the cultural and biological, insert a
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved. This is the amendment of the sponsor.
the amendment of yes, this is amendment, Mr.
All
President.
right. The Ligarda amendment is a comma after natural and biological on line 9, page 1.
In the second between lines 20 and 21,
Between lines 20 and 21.
in of the system on page 5, between lines 20 and
Page
21,
5.
1,
Between lines 20 and 21.
use of tenured migrants or other legal occupants and or using explosives or heavy equipment, unquote. This is the amendment of Senator Osmeña.
Sorry.
This is the amendment of Senator Serge Osmeña.
The Osmeña amendment is between lines 20 and 21, as read by the sponsor. That is paragraph Q. Is that correct? Do we indicate that it is paragraph Q? Mr. Sponsor?
Yes,
Paragraph Q?
Q. Yes. Yes, Mr. President.
And therefore,
Yes, Mr. President.
is it paragraph Q?
Q. Yes. Yes, Mr. President.
And therefore, any objection here and approved? The subsequent paragraphs are re-lettered accordingly.
The next, Mr. President, is on page 16, line 12.
Line,
Line 12 in item
page,
16. 1-6, line 12. Insert a new item or number 39 to read as follows. Las Piñas, Parañaque Critical Habitat and Ecotourism Area, 1412, April 22, 2007.
this is the Villar amendment, we
This
assume.
is, yes, Senator Cynthia Villar's
Please,
amendment.
can you repeat the amendment for the record?
39,
There is already a number 39 on line 12, and therefore it should be number 4.
then we renumber it after that, Mr. President. So, the 9, number it 9, it will be number after 38, this will be number 39.
11 and 12.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. Number 11 and 12.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. Number 33, can the sponsor once more read the sponsor once more, capture the amendment?
It will be 14 2000.
Any objection? Hearing none, the Villar Amendment is adopted. The Secretariat is directed to
12.
subsequent lines renumbered accordingly.
May I just add, Mr. As described,
Chair, is that an amendment being proposed? Is that a manifestation?
Mr. President, it's not an amendment. It's a manifestation that the President Resolution 1412
Is the,
ecotourism area will be submitted as an annex to form an integral part of this act, Mr. President.
all right, so,
But this is my words. This form an integral part of this act, Mr. President.
all right, so,
This is my manifestation. These are not the words out in this amendment. It's a manifestation.
prove.
It's for a 1 minute suspension, Mr. President. Yes. Okay. So next na penalties. Ready to resume.
Okay, session is resumed.
With the penalties. This amendment
Page
on page 31, line 6.
31.
A new sentence.
Page, I'm sorry?
Page 31, 31,
Line 6.
line 6. Provided further that biomass plants shall not be included, that a sufficient bond shall be deposited to the IPAF to be released to the depositor upon the decommissioning of all equipment in order to rehabilitate the site according to the zones and objectives management plans as attested to by the BMB. Close quotation period.
The complete amendment now?
Yes, Mr. President.
Is that the Osmeña amendment?
It is, yes.
Proposed as read by the sponsor, any of,
This is another Osmeña amendment, Mr. President.
can the chair have it again, Madam Sponsor?
Page 35,
Yes,
line 3, after the word substance,
yes.
insert a comma, delete the word. Another Osmeña amendment, Mr. President, on the same page, line 4, between comma and the word waste, insert the phrase untreated or other biodegradable.
Okay.
I submit.
Any objection?
Another Osmeña amendment, Mr. President, on page 30, insert the phrase commercial or large scale. I submit.
Commercial or large scale?
Yes.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On the same page and line, insert a sentence.
Commercial or large scale?
Yes.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On the same page and line, on page 36, delete the entire line 24.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
May I request for 1 minute, President?
Suspend it for 1 minute.
Line 16, page 39, line 16, a new section
Okay. Okay.
of existing facilities within a protected area, within a protected under section of this if the existence of the same plans and operations will be detrimental to the protection.
The guard amendment. Any
For,
objection?
may I continue?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes. For every continuing violation, comma, upon reaching a total fine of 500,000 pesos, violation continues to be committed for 30 days, the PAMB, through the PASU and deputizing other government entities, shall and either the forfeit in favor of the PAMB, demolition of the facility, cost of its owner. Or demolition. I submit, Mr. President. That was the whole amendment for Section D.
Will we re-letter
Yes.
the subsequent paragraphs?
Yes, Mr. President. The rest of paragraphs will be re-lettered. Any number?
All right.
Re-lettered.
The
Yes, Mr.
secretary
President.
is letter D becomes letter E on line 16,
On page 40,
page 40. All right.
line 3, after the word offender. I submit.
Approved.
On page 40, lines
With the removal of the period, how will the sentence now read? Provided the chair will try to read it.
Yes.
From the sentence now start. The chair will try to read it.
Yes.
From the sentence now starts on.
Yes.
Provided further that the court shall order the eviction of the offender from the land and the forfeiture in favor of the government of all minerals, timber, or improvement made thereon by the offender shall be subject made thereon by the offender, and administrative confiscation, etc. Is that how it should read now?
Yes, Mr. President. On page 40, line 7, 40,
Line 7.
delete the word legal
Okay.
after the word when,
Okay.
replace it with the word criminal. On the same line, delete the punctuation mark, comma, after the word.
Okay. Approved.
That was my amendment, Mr. President.
All right.
On page 40, line 10, delete the phrase independent of the administrative proceedings and punctuation mark, comma, after the word proceedings.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
Thank you. On page 40, line 11, insert the article A between the words after and judgment. I submit.
Approved.
On page 40, line 11, insert the phrase of acquittal between the words judgment and has. I submit.
Reinsert the word acquit.
2, commas,
Okay.
after the acronym DENR. Delete the 2 commas
Okay.
after the acronym DENR.
Okay.
I submit. And the last amendment would be in the existing facilities within the protected 18.
Page 43,
Line 18,
line 8. Okay.
under section 21 of this act, the rest of the paragraph beginning with the word of,
With the first, the owner. There are two words. There are two owners here. Which owner is which?
may I request for 1 minute suspension just to be certain, Mr.
Yeah.
President? Just suspend, please.
And either the forfeiture or favor of the PM.
I request for suspension.
Yes. And either the forfeiture or favor of the PM.
I request for suspension.
Yes.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we withdraw that on account of the other. It is no longer needed, Mr. President. So we withdraw that amendment, Mr. President.
So, just for the line on page 43, lines 18 up to 26 would be retained.
Mr. President, may I request again for, there have been renumberings and changing of, just to be sure, may I request for another minute suspension?
Suspended for 1 minute.
The rest of talaga beginning to repetitive. Pero nandun na sa kabila. Sige, last na to. Sige, last na to. Thank you. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
I read it to. It is already contained in. So. No more, no? No. It's not necessary, Mr. President.
So, just we are looking at the committee report 117, which was that's the work working on page 43, lines 18 to 20.
The renumbering and the relettering of the enumerations in the bill accordingly, Mr. President.
All right, the Secretariat is directed to renumber, reletter the various provisions in the bill in order to accurately reflect the correct lettering or numbering with the amendments having been
Put on record that the original author for Leticia 100 introduced their individual amendments, including Senators Villar, Cayetano, and Osmeña, and the whole chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
duly noted.
Amendments, including Senators Villar, Cayetano, and Osmeña, and the whole chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader, the period for committee amendments has been, or for individual amendments, has been terminated.
Mr. Reading.
Not yet. Any objection? The
Approve the measure.
individual amendments is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the measure on second reading.
2712 under committee report number 117 is hereby approved on number 2712 under committee report number 117 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move that we approve Senate Bill number 2712 under committee report number 117.
So suspended. Okay lang. Sige. Session is resumed. Okay. The Secretary is direct. Okay. The directed to welfare, rural development, women, family.
Contingent liabilities, with the end in view of institutionalizing fiscal and strengthening government mechanisms to enforce transparency and accountability over the utilization reporting of public funds, introduced by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Finance.
PSR number 1404, urging the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry and legislation on the state and condition of marine pollution in the country, as well as compliance with the several statutes and international treaties, protection and conservation of the environment, by Senator Sani Angara.
Environment and Natural Resources, Foreign Relations.
Committee report on the regulation and using the present law, government meaningfully helping to target beneficiaries of government programs and honoring the principle of integrity and public service, recommending that it be archived.
To the Archives. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, we may now proceed with the final resolutions for the Sine Die. Mr. President, we may now proceed with the final resolutions for the Sine Die adjournment.
Majority Leader may proceed.
Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate resolution number.
The motion is carried. Consideration of the proposed Senate Resolution 1398 is in.
Resolution number 1398, declaring as read and approved the Journal of the 85th Session of the Senate. Resolved by the Senate that the Journal of the 85th Session, June 10, 2015.
1398 is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution 1399.
Any objection? Hearing none, the chair hears none. The motion is carried. Consideration of the proposed Senate Resolution 13. The Secretary will read the resolution.
Resolution authorizing the production and distribution of 150 printed and digital copies each of the Journal and the Record of the Senate for the second regular session of the 16th Congress of the Philippines. The production
number 1399.
Any objection? Hearing none. Proposed Senate Resolution 1399 is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, I move that we Senate Concurrent Resolution number 7.
Any objection?
Mr. President,
Consideration of Concurrent Resolution number 7 is in order. The Secretary will read the resolution. Concurrent Resolution number 7 is in order. The Secretary will read the resolution.
Concurrent Congress of the Philippines, not later than 12 o'clock. House of Representatives concurring that the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives be authorized, as they are hereby authorized, to declare the second regular session of the 16th Congress of the Philippines adjourned sine die, by adjourning the sessions of the respective houses not later than 12 o'clock midnight today, June 10, 2015. Resolved further that a committee of 3 members of the Senate appointed by the Senate President join a committee of the House of Representatives to inform to close, and that the 2 houses are ready to adjourn unless the President has a message of communication to transmit to them. Has a message of communication to transmit to them.
Number 7 is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, in conformity with Senate Concurrent Resolution, the Senate Concurrent Resolution you have just adopted, I move that the committee, as provided therein, be composed of Senators Aquino, Soto, and Ejercito.
So designated.
From the Senate President.
In view of the lateness of the hour, the speech of the Senate President is hereby deemed read into the record. What does the majority wish to be recognized for?
Mr. President, it grieves my heart to hear you say that because I wanted to listen to your... nevertheless, because of the lateness of the hour, I adopt your motion.
I can deliver the speech in a private dinner with the minority leader.
I will...
You have to listen.
Yes, I will listen.
Thank you.
I adopt the motion.
Thank you. I hope and I will also be invited, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we adjourn, I would like to remind our colleagues to hold meetings, hearings, or conferences during the recess of the Congress for the purpose of studying and preparing any proposed legislation, investigate any matter or subject falling under jurisdiction. And so, Mr. President, I move that the second regular session of the 16th Congress on the part of the Senate be adjourned sine die.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion is carried. By virtue of the authority vested in me, I hereby declare the second regular session of the 16th Congress